Hello. I hope you're excited for this next talk. I know I am. Whee. So this is Ed, who fell in love with the structure of language when he started studying Latin in 7th grade. We've got a Latin fan. One. That led him through a classics degree, then onward to a PhD in theoretical linguistics. Hell yeah, you've got fans. The academic job market is brutal. No cheers there. So he moved to applied linguistics. First ESL testing, then content strategy, and now technical writing. When not writing, he's a sports omnivore. Michigan football, absolutely, go blue. Is that contentious? I don't know.
Go blue.
Curling, cricket, Formula One, yes, yes, yes. He claims his brain latches onto plenty of other weird things too, and he talks about them on his podcast, One More Thing. The last time he was in Portland was in high school, and his dad accidentally drove their rental car through the pedestrians-only part of the farmer's market. He blames poor signage and concludes words matter. And to learn more about why, with this talk, The Descriptivist Manifesto, please welcome Ed Cormany to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, those memories of Portland seem like they are far, far away, but I've been creating lots of new memories of Portland in my time so far here at Write the Docs. Better ones than driving through the market. So my name's Ed Cormany. I'm a senior technical writer at Opentrons. Opentrons is a robotics company. We make liquid handling robots for biology lab automation. And this talk is not particularly about Opentrons, except that it is about my experience as a technical writer, which has mostly been at Opentrons. But the talk is about linguistics, and the reason for that is that I've been a linguist for much, much longer than I've been a technical writer. So you heard my story going from theoretical linguistics into applied linguistics. And now as a technical writer, I consider the work that I do in a way to be applied linguistics, just a very narrow slice of that. So I hope to show today how I treat technical writing as applied linguistics. Through a manifesto. But first, let's deal with the other word because it's probably less familiar to you. So what is descriptivism? So descriptivism is, to be descriptive is to say how something is. So in the case of language, let's go through some basic examples of what it means to describe the sounds, vocabulary, or grammar of a language. So at a very basic level, here's a piece of description of English. We have this string of sounds. It goes cat, and it refers to this thing, which is a cat. This sounds like a silly tautology, but it's actually an important fact about how we speak English, that we all agree on what the words of English are. And we're being descriptive about this when we talk about it in terms of the language community's consensus, what English speakers call this animal. If you say that you speak English and you decide to call this animal dog, you are breaking the rules of English and you are going against the consensus of the people that you want to talk with. This is not because Noah Webster put cat in a dictionary. That is not why we agree that this is the word. It's because that any toddler who has been exposed to English knows that this thing is called cat because of their experience with English. The same goes for things like grammatical rules. So here are two sentences. One of them is grammatical, one of them is not. Descriptivism is very important, is a perfectly grammatical sentence of English, and you know that as English speakers even if you had not heard the word descriptivism until 2 minutes ago when I first uttered it. On the other hand, you also know that the sentence, descriptivism very important is not English unless you are Yoda. And we have this sense that, okay, Yoda speak, we can understand it, the pieces are there, but something is amiss about it. It is not truly grammatical English, it makes Yoda feel alien, but yet also still approachable. So these are basic examples of describing vocabulary, grammar of English. That's descriptivism at its most basic level. So what's the alternative? If you're not being descriptive, how are you? And there are two alternatives. You can be prescriptive or proscriptive. To be prescriptive is to say how something must be. And to be proscriptive is to say how it must not be. So the question is, as writers, can we write good prose without prescriptive rules that tell us how we must write? Well, let's look at an example. So here's some prose. I think it's pretty good because I wrote it. It's the description of this very talk that went on the Write the Docs website. So let's get into it. It's easy to assume that the technical portion of technical writing is adherence to rules, document specifications, style guides, and the like. But so many of the alleged rules of English come from decades-old myths or the whims of long-dead grammarians. How can we... yes, that. I put that there on purpose because it sounded pretty good. I think as I just read this out loud to you, it sounded good, right? Chances are, though, that at some point in your academic career, maybe very early on, someone would have scolded you for putting but in this place with a period before it and a capital B. That's a proscriptive rule. I broke it, but I think I'm still doing pretty good at speaking and writing in English. The fact of the matter is, though, that when you do this kind of thing, someone will come along and say something like, "But Ed, you can't start a sentence with a conjunction," citing the same rule. To which I say, "Touché," because you just did it. All right, so maybe the prescriptive and proscriptive rules are not the only way that we can write great English, do great technical writing. So that leads us to the manifesto about doing things the descriptive way. I'm going to lay this out in 5 points. So first of all, spoken language is uniquely human. All right, this bullet has a lot going on in it here. It is trying to summarize basically all of a Linguistics 101 course in one line, and it also has an asterisk in it because I did want to make sure to include signed languages as well, because signed languages and spoken languages have all of these same uniquely human characteristics. They are equally expressive. This has been proven up and down by linguists. But to speak is uniquely human. If you are a human and you grow up around spoken language, you will speak a language. It just naturally happens to us. It's as natural as being bipedal. The next thing, though, is writing. Writing is a fundamental human technology. And I would argue it is the fundamental human technology. Probably don't have to do a whole lot of convincing to a room of writers. But the fact of the matter is that none of us would be here at this conference today without writing, and not just because it's our jobs, but at every step along the way from the moment that you left your house to the moment that you're sitting here now is dependent on written word, people exchanging written word. So in my mind, it is the #1 human technology. The only counter-argument that I will take was from the people who say that agriculture is the #1 human technology. You gotta eat too. Number 3, writing reflects speech, although writing is not speech. I didn't expect when I put this in the manifesto that I would have such an excellent example of it, but I do right here, down to my side. This talk is being live captioned. This is a perfect live demonstration of the fact that writing reflects speech. It's trying to reflect exactly the speech that I'm saying right now. It's not exactly my speech. If you've been paying attention to the captioning, it has some differences. It has advantages. It's often clearer than what I'm saying, On the other hand, if I really speed up, I can get ahead of the writing. So there's this tight link between writing and speech, but they're not quite the same. However, observing how we communicate in speech will inform how we can communicate in writing. This is effectively a long-winded way of saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I've been taking notes in talks earlier in the conference. I've seen people around me, when someone says a particularly great phrase, write it down. They realized, okay, that spoken communication really resonated with me, was effective. I want to take that. I want to capture it in writing, maybe use it in my own writing. That's how we should be approaching turning speech into writing. And finally, communication is based in community. It's the whole reason that we're having this conference, is that we bring together a really unique speech community here. We come to an event like this because we can have conversations here that we can't have anywhere else, because we have a body of shared knowledge, a way that we talk to each other that's not the same way that we would talk to other colleagues in our company, our family at home, friends. We build all of these different language communities, and it's important to be in tune to which community we're speaking in at any given time. So that's the intro. Now let's be descriptive. So we're going to start off with a simple little grammar lesson. These are terms that you may or may not have heard of before if you didn't go through Ling 101. But in the grammar of language, there are things that are known as count nouns, and there are things that are known as mass nouns, and they behave differently. Here's a count noun, and here's a mass noun. The one on the left is a count noun because you can say things like 3 fish. This is normal. This is English. The one on the right is a mass noun because you cannot say things like 3 rice or 3 rices. You have to say something like 3 grains of rice or 3 pieces of rice. This is a fact about English. There are languages where the direct translation of a grammatical phrase would be something like 3 rices. But it's not the way that it works in English. So you know this just by virtue of being an English speaker, having been exposed to these words. You've picked up these patterns and these rules of English. So you know a lot about English that you don't realize. Well, you think you know a lot about English, and then you start a new job like I did, and you're exposed to a whole bunch of new terminology. And in my case, OpenTrons shipped me a liquid handling robot and about 500 of these things. Pieces of plastic. This is a 96 well plate. It's about this big. It's a grid for holding specific amounts of liquid that the robot can neatly organize in there. This one's 96 well plate. Probably holds 200 microliters in each well. And this belongs to a broader class of objects that I learned are called labware. New word of English to me, but I had an idea of how I was going to use this word in my writing, in my job. I thought I knew how I was going to use it. I thought it was going to be a mass noun. And then I started reading our documentation and talking to my colleagues, and they kept saying things like 1 labware, 2 labware, red labware, blue labware. This one has a little star. This one has a little car. And I was shocked. I thought, this must be wrong. You have to say like a piece of labware, right? No, they're totally happy with saying things like 2 labware. I just learned a new rule of English, and so have you now. So I guess I have to take this as, my language community informed me that this was a grammatical way of speaking English. But why was I so taken aback by this? Well, it was because humans are pattern matching machines, and I had seen the patterns in the rest of English. So if I put this up on the screen, here are 2 pieces of something that can be in the category of hardware, but I cannot say 2 hardware. If there are 2 laptops sitting on the desk, I can't say there are 2 hardware over there. I can't say that I use 2 software to browse the internet. It just doesn't work. That's not how these words work. So I was honing in on a pattern that was actually broken by the word labware. So I learned a new rule in my technical writing. But we have to also describe patterns, not just rules. So let's continue with some of these words that we're more familiar with. Hardware and software. This is a very normal combination of words. Linguists call these collocations. Basically just means you have a particular collection of words that are in a particular order. Hardware and software is a very normal thing to say. Software and hardware is a slightly weirder thing to say. We have this sense, like, right, this isn't green check, red X, but I have smiley face and upside down smiley face here. Why would someone say software and hardware? We almost always say hardware and software. How can we check our intuitions about these sorts of things? Well, one of the tools I love for doing this is the Google Ngrams corpus. So the Google Ngrams viewer lets you search basically all of the books that Google has scanned, 200 billion word corpus. You can enter your search terms, and what it will give you is results over time. So you can have a very visual sense of how different phrases are being used. So let's take a look at this example here. We are now searching the megacorpus of Ngrams, and we get this graph. And it makes a lot of sense. In 1950, no one was talking about hardware or software, apparently. And then comes sort of the mini computer and microcomputer boom, and the graph shoots up in the 70s and 80s. And then everyone, sort of understands how computers work, and we talk about it a little bit less. But the whole time, hardware and software is winning against software and hardware, but it's present. Sometimes you put a term into Ngrams and it's just a flat line across the bottom. In other words, nobody ever says this. No, these terms are both used, but at different rates. We can even leverage the power of Ngrams and have it do the math for us. So you can put a slash between the 2 terms for division and say, what's this as a single line over time representing the relationship between this? We don't have to eyeball it anymore. And we see that it's kind of noisy at the beginning because there aren't many examples. And then we have this trend where they're actually getting closer over time, but even in the most recent data, just a couple years old, it's still a 3-to-1 ratio. So our intuition that you mostly say the one thing and not the other has been borne out in the data. But there are times, there have to be reasons that we would say one over the other. Here's an example. What if you're saying about your company, our competitors only offer software products, but we offer software and hardware. I already foregrounded software, so it's natural to say it first. Here's a good place where I would use that less common phrase. And that in that context, flips that smiley face right side up again. Let's look at another example of language in a smaller community. So here is the robot that OpenTrons makes, the OT2. You can see that it has the arm there with pipettes on it for liquid handling. It's got this deck that goes at the bottom, and it has those individual slots where you can put your well plates or your labware. And this is exactly the kind of thing that I have to write about. This is the kind of thing that you can program in our API to say, where do the various pieces go and what is the robot going to do with them? And then as the technician who's going to implement this, you have to get everything into place. So if I take our labware and I put it here, I have an interesting question that came up. Did I just put it in slot 4 or did I put it on slot 4? I would love to be consistent about this. And Google, despite their 200 billion words, is not going to be able to help me because they don't know anything about this particular use case that I just walked into. So now I need to go and use tools in a different area to try to figure out what's going on in my small language community, the people who make these robots, the people who use these robots. So I'm starting now, instead of going from a megacorpus, I'm going to a microcorpus. And I'm starting in a Figma design file, which is actually where I first noticed this issue. I went, there's inconsistency here. And so I thought, I should look here at the source. I'm looking at UX copy within the application, and there's some inconsistencies. So thankfully, finally, Figma has search. It took them long enough. And I was able to search for the two terms in the file where I first noticed the issue. So I looked for in-slot, and I got 31 results. And I looked for on-slot, and I got 36 results. This has not helped me. This has only reinforced that I was correct in noticing that there was a discrepancy, but it hasn't given me any help in terms of which way I'm going to go in enforcing this in our technical writing. The good news is we can move up a level. Opentrons is based on open source software. We have a GitHub repository that includes all of our software, APIs, front-end application, and our documentation in one place. And this conveniently means that I can search across all of those things. So my mini corpus is GitHub. I can limit my search to our main repository and look for the phrase on-slot. Only 14 files got a hit here, so that seems pretty low. And in comparison, in-slot gave me 81 files. Okay, starting to see a pattern here. But one of the limitations of GitHub search is that the count that it gives you is only how many files something appeared in. On the other hand, though, there is some useful qualitative information here as well. So the first 3 hits that I got here for in-slot are all documentation. Oh, that seems good. Maybe the on-slot stuff is in code comments or other places that aren't quite as public-facing. And the other thing that I noticed here is the first hit is documentation for the OT1, our first robot. We haven't sold that robot for years. So this is old documentation that's using the phrase in-slot. The second hit is new documentation that I edited just a couple months ago. So this means that we have some continuity for this use as well. But I want to back it up even further. So because this lives in GitHub, I can clone the repository. I can bring more tools to bear on it. So I have a local copy of the repository on my computer, and I open it up in my favorite text editor, BBEdit, which has great multi-file search. Compared these two against each other, in-slot versus on-slot, 33 versus 358 hits. We're at like 10 to 1 now. There's a real pattern here. But again, always looking at the quality of the data as well, there's some noise here. In the search for on-slot, I also got the phrase calibration slot. Not what I wanted. For in-slot, I also got a certain slot. Not what I wanted. I'm interested in prepositions here. So, and I promised when I submitted this talk that there would be very few regular expressions. This talk contains exactly one regular expression, and it's this one. I just modified my search very slightly. Don't be scared. I put in the single little piece of regex that says, make sure that when you search for on-slot, \B, it has to have a word boundary before it. So I don't capture calibration. I only capture the word on. In this case, tweaks the numbers, got rid of half of them on the one side and only a few on the other. We're now at like 20 to 1 in favor of in-slot. Gets the green check mark. I feel confident that as a technical writer, I could put this in our style guide now. I could say the word that we use for this is in. We always say that we put labware in a slot. One labware in a slot. And this makes me feel good as a technical writer because then what I've done here is I've captured what my teammates have done over time and in different venues. And I'm not coming in and saying, I'm the arbiter of the style guide. I've made rules for you. I'm not being prescriptive. I'm not telling my team what they have to do. I'm telling them what they've already done. And so if they see this in documentation, or if I make a change to some of their work to bring it in line with the style guide, and someone says, hey, why did you write it this way? The answer is, because that's what we've agreed to. That's how we've been talking about this as a team the whole time. And so I don't have to get buy-in from them. They've already bought in themselves just by the virtue of their English usage. So let's go back to the manifesto, the 5 points, and see how this applies to us as documentarians. So we're going to update all of these 5 points for documentarians. First, spoken language is uniquely human. Well, we speak a lot when we create products. We have to communicate with our teams. We do a ton of talking, whether that is actual spoken communication on a call, or the slightly mediated version of that, which is writing in chats, Slack, that sort of thing. It's almost like speech. Regardless, we also write a lot when we create products. It can be that very informal writing, like in Slack, or it can be more formal writing, like product documentation, internal documentation. We have to write down a ton of things to create products. Third, writing reflects speech, although writing is not speech. By the same token, what we say and write reflects the products that we're documenting, but it's not the product. We aren't selling documentation into the world. What we're doing is we're describing the things that we're creating and trying to do it in the clearest way possible. How do we do that? On to point 4, observing how we communicate in speech. So talking about the products that we're documenting helps us clarify our writing about the product, because the more that we talk with our teams, the more that we see those patterns and internalize them ourselves. Yes, we can codify them in style guides, and that's useful for bringing new people into the community quickly, to say that you don't have to do all the pattern matching yourself. We have something that will help you get up to speed in the way that we talk as an internal community or as a community that's outward facing to our customers. And that final point, what community are we speaking in? Well, listening to our teams helps build understanding. Listening for how we talk about our products makes it so that we can, in turn, write that down and communicate it out to others. So, to summarize this in basically one sentence, one takeaway from this manifesto is we can say, let's document our products the same way we talk about our products. So, as a technical writer, you can't have eyes and ears everywhere. You can't listen to every single conversation that goes into the creation, the marketing of product that you're trying to document. But we're leaving evidence of how we talk about things all the time. And that's what we've seen, where we have these different places within our organization where we can search, where we can use tools, where there's already informal writing about how we talk about products. So, as documentarians, listen to those conversations, participate in as many of them as you can. That builds understanding within your community, and then you can share that out to the wider world. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Ed. That was so cool to see sort of the mechanics of how you find answers to all these questions that can pop up internally and cause a very specific kind of panic for a very specific kind of person. And I think you're in exactly the room to understand that.
Hopefully this helps alleviate the panic.
you brought up regex, and
did.
that's never going to alleviate panic. I'm
Sorry,
to tell
I
you.
promised.
I'm speaking
Only
for
a little
myself,
bit.
even a little bit of cholera. I don't know, a little bit. Not to bring the mood down. The regex did that. For people, we've got questions. I think a lot of the time people see prescriptivism and descriptivism. There's a lot of tension
Absolutely.
between them. And so we had an interesting question about people with academic backgrounds like yours. How do you let go of that rigidity to more embrace a more descriptivist approach to writing and to be okay with 1 labware, 2 labware?
Yeah, I think my academic training going into linguistics fairly early on as an undergraduate and then continuing on in grad school let me let go of that fairly early on. Once I was specializing in that area, I was with like-minded people who thought, aha, this is the way. But I think that one of the ways I did that as I was teaching writing in grad school was I didn't have linguists in my course. It was just a freshman seminar. And I just gave them freedom to express themselves because they had heard so many things like, I can't use the first person in an essay. It's like, well, I've asked you to express your opinion. How are you supposed to do that without saying I? And they went, I can do that? I go, yeah, you can do that. So like within our teams, we have so many places where we're asking each other for our opinions or asking for facts. People have expertise. Just let them communicate. And then when that shows up in something that's more formal, they'll feel like, oh, I contributed to that. Or, I own that in a way.
Yeah, the informal form is there for a reason, right? They use those things for a reason.
Yeah.
And you don't want to have the rules get in the way.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. We've got a couple of questions, more tension about internal and external language, terminology. How does this manifesto apply when you're calling something one thing internally, it's something totally different for your customers or any other audience?
Yeah, I think that's one piece that I didn't touch on directly in the talk, which is, yes, language communities. If you have an insular language community, a totally internal language community, you tend to build jargon the same way that like a close friend group has in-jokes that don't make sense to other people. And so that final point about communication being based in community, you have to be constantly vigilant about that. What is the community that I'm addressing now? I deal with this all the time. We have lots of abbreviations and terms that make it so easy for us to quickly communicate internally that we would never ever want customers to see because it'll just confuse them. Because you basically need training, you need induction into that community, the very narrow community, to understand how to speak and listen that way. So every time that you're writing something, this is another thing that I taught my writing students is the number one thing is who's your audience. If the audience includes all of your customers, you have different expectations of them and you'll speak to them slightly differently. That doesn't mean that you still can't use all that expertise you gained from the inside though.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's like you use the same language that's being reinforced elsewhere. Yeah.
Exactly.
Interesting. We've got an interesting question here. Isn't descriptivism why non-writers hate us? Do you agree with this premise that the internet at large is seething right now?
Ooh, I don't know. I think that's a tough connection to make.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's the pejorative way of talking about descriptivism is often the word whateverism. Like everything is fine, there are no rules. But I hope that I've shown with the tools that I demonstrated that even if you come in saying there are no rules, there's always data, there's always patterns. And so you can be pretty whateverist and still have strong opinions about what good writing is and what makes clear communication.
Yes, totally agree. I think there is an inherent inclusion too, in accepting how other communities speak and accepting that as valid language. You don't have to be elitist when you're also trying to follow rules. I think a lot of the time people conflate those, but they don't need to be the same thing.
Yeah, and that whole notion of, you understand what I meant, or I understood what that person meant, even if there's typos, things that we would consider like absolute violations of rules, even consensus-based rules. We can be generous in interpreting communication. On the other hand, as technical writers, when we're putting out communication, we want to be as professional as possible.
Yes, yes. That kind of leads into another question. Are there any language rules you will not break?
Any language rules I will not break?
Yeah, what's not whatever, Ed?
I mean, similar to what I was just saying, the mechanical rules are ones that I like to adhere to. That really does come down to style guides. We sort of have the default style guide of written English. English was a language that once didn't have standardized spelling. You would write the same word multiple different ways, just kind of depending on how you were feeling. We've agreed as a global English community that we have standards of spelling. They vary by region, UK spelling, US spelling.
Canadian spelling.
Canadian spelling. And so those are the ones that you kind of break at your peril of looking unprofessional again.
So no Yoda documentation for you?
No, unless I was doing something directly Star Wars related.
I hope so. One day. How do others on your team and related teams respond to descriptivist approaches to shared style?
I think that if you're being truly descriptive, they might not even notice. Because if you're really just reflecting the patterns that they've already established, it feels seamless to them. You hand them something that's a new piece of documentation and they go, yeah, looks good. Because nothing in it stands out as being particularly foreign to them. It's all based in the way that they've already thought about what you're documenting.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting to have data-driven descriptivism. I hadn't seen that so much before.
It's the only way to be descriptive,
right,
is to be data-driven.
Yeah.
The fact that we have these modern tools that let us use big data or to quickly search through narrow data, that's the revolution.
Yes.
The old school way of doing this is, I don't know what my team is saying. I'm going to get all of it. I'm going to count them by hand. I mean, that was how the tile distribution in Scrabble was derived.
Yeah.
It was taking New York Times articles and counting the letters one by hand, because that was over 100 years ago. But we don't have to do that now, fortunately.
We've got regex, okay.
But you've also got your brain, which is a huge pattern matching machine. You notice these things before you even realize it. And then this is the step of confirming it so that when you're codifying something into style or into your writing, you have that extra level of confidence.
Oh, it's so satisfying. How do you help internal teams incorporate customer-friendly language so that can be part of how your community already talks about the product?
Yeah, and this is also looking to that issue of a broader language community. So we're an open source-based company. That means that people can contribute to our software, leave issues on our software. We also have people who are using our APIs, writing custom protocols and describing them. So when your customers are writing to you or creating a broader community around your product, read that, listen to that. That's how you get them on the inside feeling like they're part of the community, even if you have some soft boundary between we're employees of this company and then we have a broader community.
Great, thank you. We've got one more question from Mo. I hope you don't lose the audience on this one. What's your stance and feeling about the Oxford comma, Ed?
Pro Oxford comma, always.
Yeah, okay.
It eliminates ambiguity, and I'm all in favor of it.
You live to see another Write the Docs conference. Nobody's going to be waiting like just fists and... Excellent. Thank you so much, Ed. What a great talk. I was very excited about this one. I really appreciate you coming to give it to us. So
Thank you.
another round of applause for Ed.